Welcome everyone, StealthyShiroean here, and today I'm bringing you my review of the Humble Choice Bundle for November 2024. I'll just come right out and say at the start, but this was an excellent month. If you were on the fence with the bundle but were waiting for my video, I feel like I can safely say, just pick the bundle up. But, of course, I will still do my best to let you know my own thoughts on each game. Let me know what you think of this month's bundle in the comments below. Be sure to check the timestamps for specific games and stay tuned for my final thoughts at the end. Okay, let's get to the review. Starting off the review with the first game being Garden Life, a Cozy Simulator. In the rise of cozy games, it seems only natural that we would have something specifically centered around gardening. In Garden Life, you take over managing a community garden after the previous caretaker passed away unexpectedly. There's a bit of a story with the different characters talking to you, but it's largely been there to convey a tutorial so far. Everyone is very good-natured and seemingly likable, yet I felt at times they just got in the way of what I really wanted to do. And of course, that was taking care of the garden. Originally, I didn't think I would actually like this game, but I found myself oddly invested in caring for my little patch of land. I mean, I do like farming games like Harvest Moon or Stardew Valley, but I thought something only centered around gardening wouldn't be that much fun. Well, I was wrong. I liked caring for the plants. You have to water them, obviously, but also need to check them for pests and can fertilize the plants for quicker growth. I enjoyed trimming the plants too, especially the rose bushes. At first, I was just clicking to get the cuttings, but I eventually realized that where I clicked actually shaped the plant, which was really cool. I started working on a rosebush hedge, which was very satisfying for me. There's also a bunch of decorative objects that you can get your hands on, so people who like decorating and being creative, then I'd imagine this would be your jam. I don't know when I might come back to this, but I did really like this game. Next up is Hexarchy. This caught my eye some time ago, so I'm glad to finally have gotten the chance to play this. It's a blend of a turn-based 4X like Civilization, but mixed with the card game mechanic. Each turn you draw a certain number of cards that give you access to build units, research tech, and construct buildings and wonders. Techs can add new cards to your deck that can get thrown into the rotation, but be careful about bloating your deck with cards you don't need. Luckily, you can burn cards to get some resources to use for other cards. There are also resources to manage that can be used in place of action points, or hammers as they're called. Additionally, you could use resources to boost cities, or sell for gold, especially if you have spillover, because your cities can only stockpile so much. Combat is relatively straightforward. There are some defensive bonuses you can take advantage of, like fortifying in a city or taking a spot on a hill. Largely though, the bigger number wins. This is essentially to speed up the game pacing. It may be a 4X game, but it wants to play quickly like a card game. I finished a short match in under 15 minutes, and it says on their Steam page about 30 minutes to an hour for a full game. There are different game lengths you can choose, but the way the game ends is by reaching a certain victory point threshold, or by having the most points by the time the turn count ends, whichever comes first. It's a fun blend, and while I think I prefer playing Civilization, it could be something fun to do on the side. And maybe get a friend into the game for those who don't want to sit down for a long 4X match. Karmazoo is the type of game that I feel like Humble just can't help themselves with giving out in choice. And what I'm referring to is a multiplayer-only game that is essentially dead. What is Karmazoo, though? Well, it's a multiplayer platformer that can be for up to 10 players. Players need to stick together in order to survive and help one another out to get through the levels. This nets some karma points, which can be used to unlock a myriad of other different forms, such as a frog, wolf, or even a tree that all have their own special ability to help get through a level. Dying in the game is something that is almost required, as it leaves behind a tombstone other players can jump on to help them get through difficult portions. Honestly, the game doesn't sound all that bad. Yeah, it can get hectic trying to track your own character on screen, even if it does use a different color, but I could see investing a bit of time into it. The problem for me was twofold with the game. First, if you have a friend to play the game with and they own it, then yeah, no problem, you could play with only two. Yet, if they don't own it, then you can only play their couch co-op mode, which is completely separate from the main game and is just a series of really quick minigames that honestly felt more like an afterthought than anything else. However, if you have no friends to play with, then you can just jump in with a bunch of randoms. And well, if the current player count holds, which it won't, then you'll probably be fine as they're hitting about 150 players per day since it was released in this month's choice. I didn't have to wait too long to get a match and get going. However, the reality is that before that, it was around 20 people max per day. This is further damning when my lobby didn't seem to want to start playing until we had 10 players. Although, I'll admit it might be because many of us were new and didn't know how to ready up, which is by jumping into the portal. Anyway, I hate bashing these games that end up in choice like this, but I think it's gotta be said. The game is not going to get a second win just because it's in choice. If you have a friend who wants to play it, then have a great time. If not, well, I think all but the most determined players who are interested in the concept can skip this one. The Bookwalker is basically the player taking on the role of Macaulay Culkin jumping into books. Although you're stealing stuff from them and bringing them back to the real world rather than trying to find an exit to the library. And to carry this on just a bit further, who here has actually seen The Pagemaster? And did you think it was a good film? Because I was surprised to find out that most people thought it was trash, but I think of it as a classic. Although I was maybe 6 or 7 when I first saw it, so maybe my tastes weren't as refined. Anyway, in The Bookwalker, you're actually a writer. But apparently you got in trouble and now have an enforced writer's block shackles on you that prevents you from writing? I don't know, it's weird. But clearly writing in the traditional sense is not what they mean, since the main character, and others presumably, can jump into the book's stories quite literally. In order to work off your crime, you make a deal with some seemingly shady people to take on illegal jobs of stealing stuff from other books. The first task has you trying to find a potion of immortality from a book about an alchemist conducting horrible experiments. And it's actually quite interesting. Presumably each book will have their own subplots, and in them you'll piece together what's happening while also trying to find your coveted item. What I did play from the first book is a simple isometric RPG, save for when you're in the real world, which is first person. Much of what you do is interact with things to read exposition, and collect inventory items that can either heal you, your ink, which is like stamina used in combat, or craftable items to make assorted tools. As mentioned, there is combat, but it's perfunctory. I did get a new skill after I finished the first book, so maybe it gets better, but I'm guessing the attraction will be the story and each of the mini-worlds that the player steps in. And it's the premise that I'm greatly interested in. I'd very much like to come back to this at a later date. Cassette Beasts is not what I expected it to be at all. From the title, I had assumed it was a rhythm game and was completely surprised to find out that it's actually a monster catching / fighting game similar to Pokemon. Only in Cassette Beasts, you transform into the monster by inserting the corresponding monster's tape into your cassette player. Other than lore explanations, this doesn't really change things that much from what you're used to in any other game like this, except the character also has health. So if the monster is defeated and the character is also defeated, then you'll wake up in the nearby hospital. There's also a fusion system where the better relationship you have with your human party member, then the higher chance you have of fusing whatever monsters you both happen to be transformed as. This is pretty cool, and I'm betting it's great for people who really like theory crafting the best strategies. Story-wise, it felt different enough from the standard coming-of-age story that we seem to see a lot in this genre. However, you still are a fish out of water, almost literally as you wake up on the shores of some mysterious island. You find out that people have been plucked from all over different time periods, and there have been people living in this weird dimension for the past 100 years. So naturally, you're going to be the one to figure out how to leave, or at least that's what your character intends to do. It felt like a fun game, although I'm not really one to ask about creature collecting games, since the last one I played seriously was the Gold-Silver era. But I still would like to come back to this at some point. Following that, we have the Lamplighters League, which is a globe-trotting adventure in a race against time to stop an evil organization from tapping into mystical, forbidden, archaeological knowledge all set in the backdrop of the 1930s. With obvious Indiana Jones inspirations, I was immediately intrigued with this game, and it's been on my wish list for a while. What we get is an interesting premise. A mysterious benefactor known as L has hired various agents to sabotage the machinations of the banished court as they both attempt to reach the tower at the end of the world and access its secrets before the other. Although, what we also get is a unique blend of genres. The first ingredient of this blend is a stealth action game where you need to sneak around each level and bypass guards or do takedowns, similar to things we've seen in Desperados or Shadow Tactics. But if you get caught, or if you decide it's better to go in guns blazing, then you can enter a turn-based combat a la XCOM, complete with special abilities, overwatch, and cover. Each character has an associated class that makes them better at doing certain things over others, such as more takedowns and stealth, or the difference between being a ranged or melee character in a scrap. And they all seem to have their own backstories, motivations, and hopefully good story arcs. I liked everything about this game. The gameplay was fun, and the story and characters were decent as well, even if it did all feel a bit derivative. I definitely can't wait to come back to this. My one complaint last month with getting Persona 5 Strikers was that we didn't end up getting one of the mainline titles instead. And well, here it is. It's not Persona 5 to accompany Strikers, but I'm not complaining. In a completely separate story from the other Persona titles, as that seems to be how the series works, Persona 4 follows a different hero alongside a different cast of eclectic characters. As far as the story goes, I can't tell you much. Even playing an hour and a half, the game was still setting the scene for the player. This is one of those 75+ hour games, so it has the room to take its time. And Persona has a lot of visual novel-esque scenes where you're reading or listening to the dialogue, as much of it is voice. In Persona 4, the main character has just moved to a new city and transferred to a new school when an inexplicable murder happens in this small rural town. And that's about all I really experienced so far. Oh, and getting sucked into a TV. As mentioned, you do meet a bunch of characters like his detective uncle and adorable cousin.
Everyday young life Everyday young life
And some high school friends being Yukiko, Yosuke, and Chie. All of them felt fairly well written, and once again, I'm intrigued to keep playing. I mentioned last month that the main Persona games used turn-based combat over the action-oriented combat of Strikers. However, you'd be forgiving for wondering if there was any sort of combat in the game at all, if all you played was the first hour or so and then quit. In my time with it, I had one scripted battle, which wasn't really even a battle because there was no real fighting, but it let me choose attacks for my character to do. Essentially, I can't really comment about what the combat is like at all, but I think that shows you just how much exposition you'll get with this game. While the long playtime kinda scares me off, I'm still very much interested in coming back to Persona 4 in the future. And the final game and headliner for the month is Warhammer 40k Darktide. I played Vermintide 1 and 2 before this, and was looking forward to playing Darktide despite knowing next to nothing about the 40k universe. Although I enjoyed Vermintide enough without knowing anything about Warhammer Fantasy, and I think the same can be said here. Obviously, fans of the franchise are going to get a lot more out of this, but it's a fun game in its own right. One thing that surprised me is the character creation. I was surprised to find 3 different voices, at least for the class I chose, that presumably have associated lines and banter throughout the cinematics at each level. There were a bunch of customizable physical options, but interestingly enough, there were also some role-playing background options to choose from. However, if they do anything in the game, then I can't tell at all. Although, there does seem to be more of a focus on storytelling this time around compared to their Vermintide entries. I will say that while the character creation is cool, I do miss established characters to hear their camaraderie banter among friends, or frenemies as they were. There's still some of that here, but just the fact that each character is essentially a completely different person, even if it has the same voice and class, makes me lose some of that feeling. Oh, and for my own voice at least, I did think his lines felt weird next to the scripted cinematic, but I assume it's because they had the voice actors record a bunch of lines and then just hand-selected or spliced lines to get something usable for the cinematic.
Just to process the execution notice now.
What do you say, criminal? Shall I put you out of your misery?
And ours, you would.
Be quiet. Well? Nothing to say?
This is a mistake. I am a loyal servant of the throne.
But of course, I'll just let you out now then.
Shame you'll never get to prove that.
The fighting feels very similar to Vermintide, but with some added changes to the melee combat and probably more guns. But I don't really know that with certainty. Visually, the game looks great, and really dark and dingy, but that to me seems like what I should expect with Warhammer 40k, or at least in many of the video game depictions that I've seen. I think the special enemy types were a bit hard to discern from the normal enemies, but that probably just comes with time. I think I felt the same in Vermintide with all the different special enemies, but it became second nature after a while. If you're into Left 4 Dead shooters or 40k, then give this one a go. Can't wait to get back to this, especially when I can convince some friends to pick it up as well. Okay, let's wrap this up and see if this bundle was worth it or not. I based my rating solely on whether I thought the game was worth playing on about an hour or so of hands-on gameplay. Also, I'd be grateful if you could please give the video a like if you're enjoying it, because that really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm gods. Overall, as I mentioned before, this is an excellent month. I enjoyed almost every game in the bundle and had more than half the bundle on my wish list, being Darktide, Persona 4, Lamplighters League, the Bookwalker, and Hexarchy. So I made out really well this month personally. This has to be one of the best months this year for me, if not the best. I hope Choice will follow up and finish the year strong with December, but it's usually a fizzle. My fingers are crossed though. Getting into the recommendations and starting at the top like always with the must-plays, I've put Warhammer 40k Darktide and the Lamplighters League in this spot. Darktide is a game that I already know I'll put a lot more hours into. It has a multiplayer formula that is addictive, and I like what I played so far. I know it was mixed reception on release, but it seems like a bunch of love has been put in the game since then to bring people around. The Lamplighters League has gameplay and a setting that immediately clicks with me. I'm curious to see if the two different game genres get in the way of one another. However, they seem to offer a lot of choices for the player on how to tackle each level, which was really interesting. Onto my strong recommendations, I placed Persona 4, the Bookwalker, Garden Life, and Cassette Beasts. Persona 4 could have probably easily be a must-play, but I barely scratched the surface of the game to know that for sure. I'm really intrigued by the mystery and the characters though. The Bookwalker is in a similar vein, although I do feel the combat I experienced fell short. However, narratively, it seemed to provide a compelling story, or stories as it were, and I hope it follows through with it to the end. Garden Life was, as expected, remarkably chill, but also just really fun. Trimming plants and caring for them virtually, even for a moment, has made me understand why some people can put so much effort into something like a bonsai plant. It's relaxing and rewarding at the same time. Finally, Cassette Beasts kinda just squeaks into this spot for me. I'm not the biggest fan of this genre as I mentioned, but I like the focus on story and interpersonal relations with various characters and how that affects gameplay. That alone is enough for me to want to try this monster collector over other ones we've gotten in years past that I still haven't played yet. With my week recommendations, we have Hexarchy. This is a unique blend, and the devs have to be commended for trying something different. I did like my time with the game, but I'm unsure that it would really be something I'd keep coming back to, like a game of Civilization. Although, if I can pick it up for my wife, then I'm sure I'd play it more since she's not a fan of playing a full game of Civ, despite my constant begging to play it together. And in my Don't Bother With section is Karmazoo. I don't think that this was that hard to figure out. I just can't condone adding a dead game to the bundle. The only saving grace is that the game is still playable as long as you have a friend who owns the game. Or I guess if you want to jump in now while there are still people playing it. Do you agree with my thoughts? What games, if any, are you looking forward to playing? Let me know what your thoughts are, if there are any different recommendations you'd make in the comments below. I hope this video helped you in some small way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.